right, so Enkel Collective, a slow experiment in emergence and distributed leadership is the title for today's talk. I always change it because Enkel is always changing as an organization. So Stefan and I are going to go through a bit about the history of Enkel, how did it start, what's happening today, and where are we going. And then we're going to open up for a Q&A, maybe in about 20 minutes. We'll see how we go. And we have 3-4 other members to join in then. So what is Enkel? So just quickly say what Enkel is, and then I'm going to explain it. So we're a collective of people from various backgrounds in Perth who share the belief that we need new approaches and more people to address the problems of today and tomorrow. Our mission is to create a new generation of changemakers in Western Australia. We are a non-profit cooperative, and we do events, courses, consulting, collaboration spaces, retreats, conferences, workshops, etc. So that's a very brief intro. This is something we came up with a couple of months ago, what we really do on a more on a higher level, pushing boundaries, challenging the status quo. So that's what we're trying to monetize, however you do that. So how did it all begin, and what have we done so far? I will start with that because I was one of the founders back in 2014. I moved back to Perth, or moved to Perth for the first time together with my partner Jen, who's from here. And I've been in Melbourne working in co-working spaces. I've been in Sweden, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, London, seen like this emergent movement of collaboration spaces popping up, which were like mix of co-working, maker spaces, education spaces. So we had one here in Perth called Space Cube in the CBD, but there was nothing really in Freo. So we created a meetup group called Makers and Changemakers Fremantle and posed this question on our first meetup, which is, are you interested in co-creating a new combined co-working space, maker lab, school for entrepreneurs, cafe and garden in Freo? So the idea was to gather all these things into one hub. So we had quite a few people coming down. We did 3 meetups back in 2014. So one of the things we started with was obviously to look at spaces in Fremantle. So we went to see a lot of old, beautiful spaces. Most of them would cost a fortune to do up. So we kicked off that space hunt 6 years ago. And in the meantime, we also did a lot of meetups, workshops and events, anywhere we could find. So this is like an art space in East Perth. I don't know what this is, something that we ran at the university, I guess. And this is at the South Freo Farmers Market, where we did a conference, an unconference, or a guerrilla conference, I think we called it, on the future of food. We did a few of those, and then we sort of stepped up a bit. So we did more, we took on more like, longer projects. So this was a temporary maker space we did to sort of show the potential of 3D printing and community spaces where people get together and tinker and make things. We did quite a lot of maker movement stuff, so DIY robotics for kids. We then also did bigger events in 2015, 2016. We did something called Open Source Circular Economy Days. We were the first people working with the circular economy here way back when no one had heard about it. In the meantime, also, we sort of clarified what Enkel is, and this is what I mentioned just in the start. We sort of realized like we need new approaches about innovation. We also need more people, right, to address the problems. And these 3 things emerged over the first 2-3 years: the vision, the mission, and the why. And they're still around, but they're sort of not really, sometimes we're like, oh, let's change them, but then we never come up with a better one. So these have been sticking around. We also incorporated as a non-profit co-op. That was decided quite early on, but it takes quite a lot of time to do that, as people know. Kate, who's also here on the call, know that it takes months to register a co-op. But this is really important for us, that we follow these sort of 7 rules, the principles of cooperatives, which is voluntary open membership, democratic member control, economic participation, autonomy and independence. And education, training and information is sort of education is one of the pillars of Enkel. Cooperation among co-ops and concern for community. Within a cooperative, there is some sort of distributed leadership many cooperatives don't really work along those principles, but that's been really key for us since the start, that we distribute leadership. Some people see this as leaderless, but Michel Bowen's, the peer-to-peer thinker that we've been very interested in, he talks about leaderful, so a collective full of leaders. So it's all about people stepping up, taking on, and then sort of going back into the group. But it doesn't work if there's no leader. It's not a leaderless collective. That's something we've learned along the way. So we use 3 steps in our decision-making process. So one is something called duocracy, which comes from the hacker movement. So for simple day-to-day decisions which impact few people, so like, should we buy something cheap? Then you don't have to ask for permission, you just do it. The important thing is to be transparent and check with those who are directly impacted, and also to sort of be transparent basically, and say, I will do this, or post up somewhere on social media, and then if no one complains or says no, then you just do it. If it's a bit bigger, like if it's involving financial risk or brand risk, we put it up on our online platform Lumio, which is awesome. And it's quite hard to use. It's taken us years to we still don't use it properly, I think, but we're getting there slowly. So that gives every member 1 vote on a proposal that we put up. So for example, now I'm sitting in our space in Fremantle, the Naval Store, and we have a proposal up, Pete put up yesterday, saying we're going to take on a lease of more square meters in this space. So that will be voted by the whole collective. And then we can't sign the contract with the landlord until we voted yes on that. So Lumio is number 2. The third one is sort of which we have to have legally in extreme conditions, for example, risk of bankruptcy, etc. Significant negative branding, the board can step in, but that never really happens. So Lumio works quite well. We use something called a community canvas as so it's basically 3 elements. The red is culture, the blue is identity, and the green is structure. So it's sort of a way of organizing communities that we've used that works quite well. Just a bit more on the distributed leadership. We've been very inspired by New Zealand's Enkel Collective. This book you see here at the bottom called Better Work Together, which I highly recommend, which is all about sort of how to do this in practice. So Alana Irving, who was part of the NENA conference here last year, got some good quotes around distributed leadership. There are negative things about this, and I think we could talk a bit about that late after my presentation about what are the pitfalls, what are the challenges. Because if you read this book, for example, or if you hear about people running leaderless organizations and leaderful, it sounds like, oh, this is the future, this is really cool, but it's actually bloody hard. So I think the main thing here is this third point. If the culture is hostile to questioning power, co-creation, and co-leadership, if the culture is hostile to questioning power, co-creation and co-leadership can't flourish. And I think that's sort of an ingrained cultural thing we have when we grow up, not to question power, from our teacher to our boss, etc. And it's hard, if you join a group, but that's also a balance. You can't question too much when you go into a group. So it's like, how do you question power, and how do you sort of listen and wait until it's the right time to question power? And the role for us in Enkel is then to create that space for people to do that. And I think that's the really hard part. How do you create an organization that is fine with that doesn't give control too much, but doesn't let go too much either? And you can't just declare there are no bosses and expect everyone to self-organize. Hidden hierarchies will emerge, and distributed leadership will die on the vine. And that's true, and that's something we sometimes talk about, probably not enough, about hidden power structures.
So I think that last quote, you can't just declare there are no bosses and expect everyone to self-organize. I think that's something that we struggle a lot with, especially with the idea of hidden hierarchies. Like, there's definitely hidden hierarchies that have come in and come out. And in that way, distributed leadership dies because we end up deferring to whoever the top person is. And I think a lot of that falls onto you, Adam. There's this latent desire amongst the collective that kind of comes up every couple of months where we're like, oh, we just want Adam to like do this thing. But I think because you refuse to take ownership, and that's not a bad thing, but like, I don't know, it's kind of complex, right? There's a lot of things that affect this, and one of them is that kind of business as usual mentality that's ingrained in our culture, that whole no questioning. It's kind of like a ghost that haunts everyone, and that colors our expectations of how long things are going to take, right? We kind of expect them to be very quick, and we'll have these wonderful short-term outcomes, when in reality we've chosen this new unknown model of emergence where the outcomes are going to take a long time. It's going to be really difficult, and it's kind of the opposite to how we've lived. So it's very, it's like, it's freaking difficult to do.
So I don't know if Andy's on the call, but Andy Thompson is also a member. We've talked a lot about this and the sort of challenges with distributed leadership, and how do you it requires that people step up when they see there's something that's not working, because one person can't do it all the time. So it's not really a flat hierarchy, a flat structure. It's more like, we talked about this metaphor of like a fish net, so that's the structure. But then you have fishermen poking the nets up with like their oars. It's like something like that, so it pokes up and then down again. So there's one of the people stepping up and doing something, and then they sink down in this sort of web again, the network. So I'm writing a blog post on that, which has been a draft for like 3 years. So finally, I hopefully publish it. We can talk. Let's talk more about that.
Andy is there, Adam. So should we bring Andy on?
Andy here. Should we let him in and see what, if you have any?
So we're just in the Holonic mobile office here in the city of Canning today. So yeah,
Dylan's rented. What's it called?
So I'm I don't own a vehicle, but I rent vehicles off Car Next Door.
Okay.
So we're in a van at the moment.
We're in a Car Next Door.
We're just being back-to-back meetings. We've been in Good Sammy, and then been to some audio-visual place regarding something else this morning. So apologies for being late. So I missed a bit of it, so I'm not too sure what was said before, sort of the last few words. So.
Yeah, Adam was just sort of giving the story of Enkel so far from its inception in 2014, and I think we're sort of just riffing between Enkel members, so Adam, Steph, myself, and Andy.
Yeah, so we were talking about the leadership, Andy. The thing of trying to have a distributed structure, a flat leadership structure, and the challenges in that, and having someone required to step up once in a while and do things. The rest of the collective allowing for that, but also not controlling too much. So you and I talked about this fisherman. I just explained that fisherman metaphor with the sticking up, and then then it falls down again to flat net, and then
I think you actually found some post on that somewhere and an image of it, but definitely agree. So going through this sort of experience of distributed leadership or flat sort of structure, often someone stands up and does stuff. So in the case of Enkel, obviously Adam's sort of stood up and done a lot, and is the sort of the point in this fishnet. Steph and other people have done stints as well during their time, and maybe there's a couple of people who come together and do it and work on a project, and then it's sort of someone else steps up and the point moves to someone else. And I think that's really sort of that flexibility, and the concept of emergence sort of comes into play. And with your organizations, you probably see that happen as well. And I think sometimes leadership gets overused, but in other places gets a bad rap. And I think it's that sort of struggle, and it's not one thing or the other. The whole leadership and followership, I think, are going to go hand in hand into the future. It's just how we think about those are different, and our skills and our abilities are being one or the other. Someone might have leadership skills, but I think one of the hardest skills is the followership skills, and is that ability to be a leader but also know when it's your time to follow, and good leaders know when to follow. That makes sense?
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful point. Yeah.
Cool.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, so like Andy, that's like such an amazing point, and that's exactly what we've seen going through Enkel. And this, like, I think there's something deeper that kind of happens as well. So with the idea of being leaderless or leaderful, anyone who steps up, they probably experience this feeling of like empowerment, that they're able to do something and everyone accepts their position of leading a project or leading an idea. And something that I've seen in Enkel is that because we don't actually have a process for self-organizing, and only some people tend to decide that they want to step up and be a leader, you get this kind of division between those that do leadership and those that don't, right? And then like sometimes I think this creates a bit of a sorry, my I'm just sorry, my baby's just getting fed. Yeah, so okay, so my point is like, okay, so some people are going to step up and some people don't, and that's totally fine, right? But at the moment, Enkel does not have a process to encourage people. There's no process to help people self-organize, which does create these hidden hierarchies in terms of people who do step up and people who don't. And I worry sometimes that that creates a division, maybe even like a division at the ego level. Like some people feel that, oh no, I haven't done anything, so I can't do anything, kind of thing, right? That perpetuating that mentality. So they look to those that do stuff and push them into that perpetual leadership model or leadership mode kind of thing. So I think there's something for Enkel to really think about in terms of what is our process to help people self-organize and encourage everyone to step up into these leadership positions.
Yeah, totally. I think that's sort of what I mentioned, but before, of creating the conditions for. I think that's we talk a lot about that, creating the conditions for emergence, for distributed leadership, and that's that's organizational design. But it's so hard. I'm going to move on here, and then we can move into questions at the end, because this ties into emergence, which is a point I want to talk about later. We haven't even talked about what that is. We just throw that word out. This is basically the quote that summarizes Enkel so far for me. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So if you see this first, you think that's great. I want to go far. But recently I've been in a situation where I have to go fast. So with the naval store here now, for example, where I am. And then distributed leadership is really hard, because it requires a lot of transparency and communication, and everything you do needs to be captured, written down, communicated to the rest. So you sort of add a lot of hours to your work week. So that's sort of one of my main challenges with distributed leadership is the speed. Like sometimes you gotta go fast. You see an opportunity, gotta capture it, otherwise the window's closed. So this proverb is so good, actually. But I always saw it from one perspective in the beginning, that yes, we want to go far, but actually there's two sides to it. So it's brilliant. Just back to the story. So what happened? Steph, please talk about the Living Labs experience.
Oh, okay. So the Living Labs was probably in about 2015. It was probably run for 3/4 of the year. And the way that I see it, it was like a community accelerator program. So the community was brought together, anyone interested in creating change, and we all kind of put ideas on the board about what we want to do. So some people moved into food, community, and education. And during that process, those little groups came up with ideas about what it is you want to do with food or education. What is that social problem that you want to address? And then we actually went and did something about it. Like the community group ended up writing a document looking at how we can make positive change. The Urban Food Production Lab created a prototype about how could we make, using hydroponics, create a small scale, high yield kind of lab in a seed crate. So they went and they did research on that. My group, the Education Lab, we wanted to address the gap in STEM education. So really we looked at, how can we get students that don't have access to higher level science courses. So if you're not in tag science, like the special and gifted science, or if your parents don't have money to send you to robotics camp, how can we bridge that? So we ran these free education lab sessions where we had scientists come in to kind of build a 3D community. So the idea of getting high school students in, uni students to mentor them, and scientists and industry professionals coming in. So from all three different levels, and kind of creating that social capital within it. But of course, the problem that I was trying to address was much more complex than that. And the requirements of the education system wasn't about, deepening and building your social capital so you can excel. It was about getting a specific answer to a test so you can move on to the next grade. So we shifted more down into a tutoring group. Yeah, so those were the living labs.
Cool, thanks. Just a question there. So it was basically Jorlen was former member who was behind this. So how did he and Enkel help you if you were gonna get some feedback out of it?
So I think
hindsight, was there, can you see, how did it help you back then?
It was really good. I think you guys provided a really great structure in terms of how to get these ideas and how to actually manifest something, which is always the most difficult part. The actual doing is very difficult. I felt really supported by you and Jorlen and the whole Enkel community in doing that. And I really think living labs is something that we should do, but perhaps, I don't know, over a longer period of time, because this was, say, for about 8, 9 months that the program ran. Maybe if you had it as a more long-term thing, or I don't know, ran it within organizations. There's a lot of potential behind this, but I think Enkel's knowledge can help transform it into something much better, but I don't know if the community and industry is ready for something very Enkel-ish.
Yeah, that's also the thing we always talk about. Mm-hmm. We're always too far ahead of the parade. You can't see.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steph. So I think the community lab you spoke about actually turned into something called the Vic Park Minilab, which was a 2-year activation project together with Town of Vic Parks. We were given a peppercorn lease in a suburb here in Perth called Vic Park, and for a little house you see here on the picture with a big garden in the back. And we did a lot of stuff there over those 2 years, courses and dinners and bigger events, and it was sort of like a co-working space / meeting place / I don't know, but it was really interesting. Didn't really work because we couldn't really invest in it because it was too short term. I mean, it worked for what it was, but we could never sort of take it up a step because we only knew it was a short-term lease and no one wanted to invest any money in it. But it was a great sort of experience. We also, at that time, 2016, 2017, we started something called Enkel Pro, which was a consulting arm of Enkel. Did most of the work for government, design thinking, innovation workshops, things like that. Also kicked off Enkel U, which was a school for changemakers. We did Enkel Changemaking 101, which was a 6-week course. Other workshops and masterclasses, which then sort of died out or hibernated. It's coming back in another shape now through another organization that's affiliated to Enkel called Westa. And then we did heaps of events, 2017, 2018, 2019, bigger stuff. NENA Symposium in 2018, and then the big Beyond Paradigms last year, which was probably a bit too big for us. So this year we're gonna do, as Al showed in the beginning, a smaller, so Enkel is collaborating with NENA to do a smaller unconvention in November, 21st of November. Biggest project at the moment is the Naval Store, which is the space we finally found after all us looking at spaces back in 2015. Been working on that for years. It's also a it's a council-owned space in Fremantle, and we've just moved in recently. It looks like this. So I'm sitting upstairs. This is what it looks like downstairs today. There's an art exhibition for a couple of weeks. So if you're in Perth, come down and check it out. The other stuff today is this. So these are the organizations that are affiliated with Enkel today. This is our website. So we have the space. We also have some of the content of the space, but a lot of the space is actually used by other organizations. So not only Enkel are using the NENA store, there are other organizations as well. I don't know if I'm going to go through this. It's sort of stuff we did at our workshop in June when we had a bit of a reflection. We looked at what have we actually done since we started. So I can quickly read the 6 points are seeding, auspicing, and nudging people to start social impact projects, supporting individual members' personal development, School for Changemakers, and the Center for the Future, which is sort of where I am now. It's going to be a Center for the Future, whatever that means. Organization consulting, and last one, supporting, inspiring, and connecting the Changemaker community here in Western Australia. We started out doing the new economy movement here, which has now been taken over by the NENA Perth hub. If you see all this, this tweet popped up in my feed earlier this year, and this sort of like really sort of made me think, what is a good metaphor for the person that does things in a way that seems incoherent, making a connection here, sharing an insight there, fixing a thing here, building a little thing there, with the emerging pattern of things getting more meaningful and coherent overall. So that's sort of like how I see Enkel, or, you know, when I think, oh, what a fucking mess, it's chaos, then I sort of think, oh, this is actually, it is emergence, that's just sort of trust it. It doesn't make sense often, but in hindsight, it often makes sense what we're doing. So emergence is the process of becoming visible after being concealed. No one decides, so no, you can't decide what's going to happen. And we've struggled with that as well. Simultaneous actions spring up in many different areas, and they connect and can become a powerful system with influence at higher levels. Yeah, so this is sort of, I think the key thing here is that you can't see what you've done until in hindsight. So it's good to do these sessions like today where we actually sit down and reflect. So just briefly before we go into Q&A, what's next? So this is where I'm sitting now in this building here in Fremantle. A lot of the stuff's going to be concentrated here in the next 5, 10, 20 years. We've started to do a bit of music, art, as I mentioned. There's a photo creative studio here. This is mainly to get people in. So we have an art and design theme now for the first 1.5 years, because it's in Fremantle and we want to get in creative people into the space. We also have community organizations. So we have the conference coming up, as I mentioned, or the convention. This is the Remake 6160, Sewing Ladies of Fremantle, repurposing old cloth. Here is the convention. Please sign up on Humanities. And where I am sitting now, I don't know if you can see, putting in these artist studios in a couple of weeks. So we're going to start with that in phase one. Hopefully in a couple of years, it's going to look more like this. It's going to be meeting rooms, co-working, and education center. Working together with a group called Innovation Design Entrepreneurship Academy, IDEA. They were here on the call, on a webinar a couple of months ago, and presented their idea. So they're going to be having their academy for high school students up here from 2022 is the plan. That's it for me. Here's the details. Yeah, I think that's it. Let's go into questions, shall we?
Look at all those young faces on that photograph, eh? Doesn't time fly?
Oh, thanks, Eddie. Eddie's on the call. He actually took that photo. Credit Eddie Heron. Thanks.
I'll actually start off because I've obviously known of Enkel for quite some time. You and I have known each other for forever, probably since those photos as well, Adam. And but I've never, you know, been totally immersed in Enkel. So I've just been watching what you do from afar. Very interested in everything that's, you know, been achieved. But when it goes back to leadership, I think the organisation has to learn that leadership isn't one person at one particular time. Leadership is lots of individuals doing their thing that culminates in Enkel being known for being change makers as a group. So leadership is happening all the time, and we've looked at a governance system called sociocracy, which gives people circles of leadership. So if you've got a project, then you're the leader of that project, and that, you know, the leader is still leading the organization, but the leaders of the project should be leading in what they're passionate about. And when they're passionate, then they want to lead. So, you know, you have to look at a way at giving people the leadership in where they're at. And sometimes you don't have to call it leadership because it scares them, but, you know, let them lead from that pace of power for them. And I've seen it, you know, you've all gone off and done different things, and now, you know, those different things are actually culminating in you know, those organisations that were embryonic are now out into their own space doing some great things. And, you know, Kate and Dylan and Andy, and I think you've probably taken a bit of time out, Steph, with the baby. You know, Fiona, I know I've seen a lot of your work, Fiona. I know that we haven't worked together yet. And Maggie, I know, is doing a heck of a lot of work with UBI. So, you know, you are all playing leadership roles, and then the collective of that being that, you know, it all came together because of Enkel.
I didn't mention that we have so back in 2017, I think it was, we did a big sort of like, because one of the sort of things you got to have also if you want to do a distributed leadership is to give autonomy, right? So I didn't mention that word, but you got to decentralize as well. So decentralize power, and in doing that, so Andy and I did a big, we spent months to think about how do we actually how do we create autonomized units, because we had arms, we call them arms, Enkel arms, didn't really work. So then we said, let's just see what happens if we cut the arms. So things happened, like people left and started their own organization, which was great. That's sort of what we wanted. So the problem was to keep them still in Enkel. And so like maybe Dylan and Andy can talk about that, because that's one of the organizations. It didn't start with Enkel, but I think it's sort of seeded somehow in Enkel.
Yeah, so I actually met Dylan through, I was, you know, sort of initially going to start Holonic on my own, and sort of met Dylan through Enkel through Elaine. And we just sort of hit it off and went from there. But I would say one of the things that Enkel has sort of given to a lot of people is that empowers you and allows you to realize the stuff that you're talking about isn't complete nonsense. And it's just that realization of where you are. And for me, it's been that realization that Enkel was too far ahead of the curve, and it's good for experimenting, but it's really not super positioned for changing in the short to medium term. It's more of a long-term thing, like that proverb. And it's really about how do I take some of this learning from Enkel and really keep a foot in Enkel, keep on the edge, but try and be in the mainstream. That's really what Holonic is trying to do, is sort of get people on, not a circular economy journey, get people on a new economy journey, but don't talk new economy. And even at the moment, it's like the circular economy is sort of gone down the waste and recycling route, which it's not really about. And the sort of the donut economics is maybe the new narrative, but again, it's just a throwaway narrative. But really, you know, that's, I think, what, you know, the beauty of Enkel is that emergence. And even Holonic as an organization, it's, you know, we're sort of emerging and developing, you know, even the way we sort of frame what we do, it's looking for things that work, that engage more of the mainstream, and learning from it, and not being too stuck on one thing. And it's not easy, don't get me wrong, it's not easy, and I think it works better working closely on a small team, with a small team, to get things going. But I think there's something about group learning, and I think that's, for me, that's what Enkel's been. It's been about group development and learning, and I think we're all so much better for it. Even the people that have left, people leave and come back and leave and come back and leave and come back, and I think, I would say sometimes Enkel doesn't get enough credit for what it's achieved, and especially what Adam, likes of Steph and others in the background, Pete in the background, have done. Yeah, it's a huge amount of work, and that's real leadership, because, you know, leadership often doesn't need to be seen. And I think I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the work that's sort of gone in Enkel.
Yeah, if I can just add into that, I think that was beautiful, Andy. So I followed Enkel for years. So I first got into entrepreneurship, and I suppose to use the more holistic term, change making, in like 2014, 2015, as I was graduating UWA through Bloom. I can remember your work, Steph, the Education Lab posters all being through there, and there was a really good connection between Enkel and Bloom at the time. So Bloom's a student-led entrepreneurship community through UWA that was started by a bunch of young entrepreneurs that were frustrated that the universities weren't creating an environment for students to start new organizations and to be entrepreneurs. But I followed Enkel for years just online. You know, you can follow and watch from afar, and it really inspired me. You know, I feel like even before I met and you know, consider Adam Jorlen a good friend now through the work I've done, I knew of Adam just by following him, connecting with him on LinkedIn, and it was great. The story was really cool, but I wasn't like, there wasn't the pull factor for me to come to Enkel events, to come to the Minilab. Like, to be honest, you know, I thought Enkel was a bit weird, you know, 3 years ago. And I still have these conversations daily, you know, where people are like, oh, can I join Enkel? You know, what do you do? And, you know, I think even our story, Andy and our story, you know, even like we're sat in a car here, in a car next door, you know, having this conversation now on Zoom, but we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Enkel, if it wasn't for Elaine connecting us up, if it wasn't for like, so actually that came out of a ULab Theory U that I did with Elaine and with other friends and family members. I think there was probably some other Enkel members involved in that. I know, Fiona Brooks, my bad. I made that mistake the other day. Sorry, Fiona, was one of the facilitators of that ULab. So there's this kind of informal community. And I think, you know, my mentor always says this to me, but even through the work we're doing at Hierarchies, we've had great impact. We just haven't made it visible. And I think Enkel's the same. It's had a tremendous impact. It's just, we're moving into a phase now where we'll be making it more visible. And the great work that Adam's done in the sort of fast sprint mode of getting the naval store up and running during a global pandemic and in an economic recession in WA is phenomenal. And there's really all this great work over the last 5-6 years. It's our time to thrive, and it's our time to take these types of leadership and get them out to all these organisations in WA and abroad. And it just, I think Enkel's fantastic, and people on this call listening should definitely get involved, come along to our events and be a member with us in the future and be a part of helping to spread and inspire, I guess, helping to inspire the next generation of change makers. They're here, and we're all getting to work each and every day. So
I just, particularly since being in the warm data space, I've noticed a slight allergy to the term change makers. It just becomes more and more clear that change is happening. And one of the causes of some of the destruction we're seeing is that we keep thinking we actually know what's going to happen when we try and intervene in complex living systems. So I feel more drawn to creating the conditions in which life can thrive, and then letting life do what it needs to do, rather than trying to make things go in any particular direction. So I'll just throw that in there to see whether in time, I don't know, I'll just throw it in there, right?
I think that's been one of the, for me, I'm exactly the same. Like Changemaker, I don't think we've liked the word Changemaker since we sort of started using it back in 2014. We've always been like, you know, but we've always actually said we are not the change makers. Our role is to create a new generation of change makers. We haven't taken that on, at least. But now it's like you say, like I think people get that, start to understand it's not, and that's why we now use like emergence more than change, right? So we can't plan, we don't know what's going to happen. It's more like creating the condition for whatever is meant to emerge, and make sure that it's not going in the completely wrong direction where we don't want to go, you know. But I'm more like, I'm less and less doing visioning, for example. I think it's quite pointless. So if a futurist saying that, and visioning is one of the, you know, is one of the big things in our field. But I'm sort of like, you know, we have no fucking idea what's going to happen in 10 years, you know.
Even within the worker-owned cooperative movement, yes, it's the same. You've got to allow emerging, whatever emerges. We've got to talk about what that is and move forward. So if that means we've got to leave something behind while we move forward, well, so be it. Yeah, you're always striving to make the most of what's happening. And I know that like an overnight success takes about 10 years, apparently. So, you know, we've only just got to like year 4, and we're still striving to be an overnight success. And I hope that we're blazing a trail, but it's darn hard work.
I feel like in 2020, you know, I've had this conversation a lot with like clients and friends and collaborators and all sorts of good humans in WA. We've lived through so much change in 2020. You know, And often it's like in Enkel on calls like this, you know, using the term changemaker, but to other people it's entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, innovators, leaders, you know, depending on, you have to be a chameleon, I think, depending on, and use different language depending on who you're speaking to. But in 2020, you know, you're at, you know, many C-suite, many leaders, many people running organizations or managing teams or whatever. You know, you're either a change maker or a change taker, I think, but we're all change makers. You know, the world is constantly changing, and it's changing more and more. I think this year it's like, I did not expect I'd be where I am coming towards the end of 2020 when I, you know, started the beginning of the year. You know, our business, Holonic, is in a really good position, I think, where we thought we would be more into the future we're at now. You know, thanks to COVID-19, it's much easier to have these sorts of conversations in WA with organisations. And I think Enkel's the same. You know, it's our time as an organisation, as a collective, for Holonic and all these other great organisations that have been sort of seeded and supported and incubated by Enkel, and all the people here on this call, and all the ones that will watch this recording, you know, that will go out afterwards. It is time to thrive and to all be leaders, I think, each and every day.
I would love to see Enkel birthing more cooperatives. That would be brilliant.
Co-op lab in the naval store.
I think one thing I just throw in there, we're sort of talking about how great Enkel's been, but at the same time, I think it's worth talking about some of the struggles, because I think that's, for me, is the real success of Enkel is the struggles that we've been through and understanding them, and how we're bouncing back, and how we're reinventing ourselves, and the whole people side of things, and how all the dynamics work with all these different opinions, which again comes back to that sort of distributed leadership side of things. But that in and itself, Enkel has been an experiment. So saying what it is, and this comes back to the things like people will say, what's the purpose of this? What's the purpose of that? What's the purpose of a system? And sometimes the purpose of the system is what it does. And I think for me, Enkel's really an exploration in how to collaborate with one another. What works, what doesn't work, and you know, and a way of connecting with other people, other groups that are doing cool, amazing stuff as well, and learning about how to talk to others in this space, or who are interested in maybe getting involved with it, but how not to scare them. And I think, having been through that experience, you know, this is what we do at Enkel. We've done it at Holonic, and I'm sure most of the people in this room have done it as in this Google, in the Zoom chat, have done it as well. Is how to communicate in different ways to different people. Like Dylan was saying, is something that's come out of Enkel for me, and it's really those struggles of how to be a human in the 21st century and work in a different way. So for me, it's not about creating a new generation of change makers per se. It's really about, you know, failing, getting up, going again, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work is an experiment, and that's where this whole emergence concept, I think, comes from.
And if I can just add to that, how many organisations will, to use a metaphor maybe of airing your dirty laundry on a public webinar? So maybe if more organisations, imagine C-suite leaders getting on board, just going, hey, here's how our culture stinks, and here's what we've done wrong, and all these failures, and this is what we're doing about it. Imagine if we were more authentic and vulnerable and real. I think, you know, that in itself, even this event at the moment, that's kind of coming up for me. I know I just saw on the call Steph Arrowsmith, who I've met a few times, but she's done some awesome work. She's a Perth changemaker that's inspired me, so maybe we can bring her in to share some of her experiences or ask some questions.
Hey Dylan, good to see you. And it's good to see a couple of faces. Hey Adam, I think last time I saw you, we were hanging out in Vic Park. You were showing me the space.
Yeah, that was
back there.
Yeah, ages ago. Now I'm here. You have to come and check this out.
I know. I'm in Singapore right now, but my family's in Perth, and I used to go back and forth a lot, but been doing some network building out here around circular economy. And I've been following, and I mean, since we met Adam, I've been so curious about Enkel and following, and I was really excited to join today to hear a bit more about how things have evolved, what have we learned, and I mean, I think it's still such an important thread to stay connected to the ecosystem in WA, and it's there is such a unique culture about it. I've been involved also in Inspiral and learning as much as possible from, you know, how networks who, I guess, follow, believe, and nurture emergence, what that looks like, and what are the structures that enable enable that to happen, and the maybe organizational structure is not the right thing, but to your point also about like how can leadership become more centralized and evolved? How can we all feel agency and ownership of the same identity to help these conditions thrive? I think it's really interesting. And Adam, I was also reminded of, you created a network a while back. Was it the
Superhero Spaces? Yeah.
Superhero Spaces network. So it was really interesting because my background is also an impact hub. So I guess, yeah, networks is just in the DNA, but always thinking about like, there are, I bet, more and more networks than ever thinking about this, especially because of pressure that this world has been put under with COVID. More people are waking up and going, hang on, there's got to be a better way to come together and build things that are more meaningful and shift towards more systemic change. And I think there is a place and a time now in the world where the work that's happening here and the learning and the collective energy here is more important than ever. So I think that visibility point is one. Number two, I'd love to see how networks thinking like this are working with one another. I know, Adam, you're connected to the Inspiral crew in and I think a lot of us are in formal and informal ways as well. I wonder what dialogues are happening there so that we can kind of learn and leverage with each other and be more connected. Yeah.
I think I've sort of, we met those. So they're our uncle or whatever you want to call it. So we meet them once in a while, and some of them have been here and mentored us. But for now, I've sort of decided to focus on the local and not the global, which has been quite nice actually. So, but we're gonna go back and start, like waving those networks like Eddie's posting here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have to go, guys. I think we better wrap up here now. Al, do you want to say some final words?
Look, that's been very interesting from you all. As I say, many of us have been following you from afar, even some people who've now joined the Enkel Cooperative, joined after knowing of you for some time. You have been doing wonderful work. You have been trailblazers. There's no doubt about that. And it has been interesting seeing some of the strong leaders, that they're going to do what they need to do. And that's the right thing for them to do as well. So, sometimes we weave in and out of, the main networks. But as long as everything has a terms of reference to the new economy, and I think, Adam, you've really cemented that now. It's talking about the new economy. It's talking about localization. And yes, all of us have still got that big picture thinking there. But if we're highly concentrated on the localization part of it, we can get some wins that go out to the general community, not us that, are already the converted, but are sharing those stories and live examples to the community at large. Because if we don't change the community at large behavior, then we'll be like, the hippie power movement of the 60s being talked about in the 2050s. So let's get some localization happen. Let's get right behind, please, every single one of you, please, please, please promote the Unconvention, because that is an opportunity for us to tell that story on a bigger scale. You talk about not having leadership, but if Adam, myself, and Kate weren't driving the Perth NENA hub at the moment, these individual stories would stay individual, and that's not how we're going to, to change government, if you like, to change that narrative that is, it's all too hard, unless it's, we can show them something. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Dylan, for that lovely wrap up, and look forward to seeing you in a fortnight's time for New Economy number 10. So thanks, everybody.